Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to take a look at some of the tactics which Trump has been employing in his first few weeks in government and consider how vulnerable we would be in Britain to the same tactics. This isn't about the risk of Trump-style populists coming to power in the UK. The threat of it isn't as imminent as some fear, but it exists. We could easily end up with such a government. Indeed, we did have a tamer version of it with Boris Johnson. This is more a question about if or when it does happen, will they be able to do what Trump is doing right now? Will the checks and balances we have be stronger or weaker or about the same as America's? But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So I actually got the inspiration for this video from a response from Sam Friedman on his latest Substack. He works for the Institute for Government these days, but has worked at the heart of the government, advising, for example, Michael Gove some years ago. He was answering a question about the checks and balances we have against not so much Trump as Trumpism. Before I go over what he said, as well as what I think, let's just be clear about what we're talking about here. It's not the policies. If in the future we elect a Reform UK or a merged Reform Tory government into power, of course we're going to end up with a government having policies remarkably similar to Trump's. But what Trump is doing is exceeding his authority. He has signed executive orders which he has no authority to sign. He tried to change the constitution by executive order. A judge blocked it. He sacked a load of federal workers, including FBI. He locked some workers out of their computer systems. More specifically, the unelected and unmandated Elon Musk did that, but it was still done. The action still happened. It didn't matter that it was illegal. Neither Trump nor Musk had the executive authority to carry out those actions, but they still did it. There are hearings taking place. In fact, I'll put a link in the description below if I remember, of a massive list of court cases resulting in these actions. And judges are ruling these moves illegal. But none of it is stopping Trump doing it in the first place. The fact that the order is being quashed after a few days or a few weeks isn't stopping these acts of disruption against the American government taking place. So the real question here is, do we in the UK have anything in place which would stop a British Prime Minister ordering things they have no executive authority to order? Would officials simply refuse because they understand the limits of executive authority? Or could they be made to carry out the action anyway and let the courts sort it out? And against this background, Friedman made a number of comments about the differences between the political system in the USA and the way it works in Europe, including in the UK. First point he makes is the problem in America is there is no official opposition in America. Like in the UK, we have a leader of the opposition, its official position, who can not only command parliamentary time, but media time to call out executive overreach should it occur in the UK. You can literally demand an urgent question to question the government about something that looks a bit dodgy. And this happens all the time. Americans have no such system. Democrats have to try to act in a coordinated way, but they have no leader to organise this response. Another difference Friedman points out is that Trump can bully most Republicans into obedience because he can disrupt their primaries if they cause trouble. So they're caught between a bit of a rock and a hard place. Some of what Trump's doing is going to be very unpopular and risk them losing their seats. But if they challenge Trump, then he can make sure they're not even the candidate. In the UK, MPs will be way more in your face to their leader if they think he or she is making an arse of things. Like, look at the U-turns Boris Johnson was forced to make just because Tory MPs realised the policies were massive vote losers. Yes, Boris Johnson had withdrawn the whip from quite a lot for a British Prime Minister, quite a lot of his MPs, but he can't do it with all of them. You know, a political leader, they can dangle the carrot of ministerial appointments for behaving. They don't really have the same sort of stick Trump has over a large backlash within your party. But there are weaknesses. I would begin by pointing out the relationship between the different British governments we've had and legal advisors. So when it comes to the government, you know, sticking within the law, my first brush with this was in the build up to the Iraq war under the then Labour government. Did they have the authority or not? The moral arguments were one thing, but one of the big debates was, well, whether you agree with it or not, is it legal? Now, I'm not a lawyer, but when the government's most senior independent legal advisor quit, That was a pretty big hint to me that the action, was probably illegal. Fast forward a few years under Theresa May, and I recall her wanting her Attorney General at the time, Geoffrey Cox, to assure Parliament that some aspect of her Brexit plan was legally robust. I forget what it was exactly, but I do remember the response. Now, let's be clear here. Geoffrey Cox is a proper bellend, but he also respects the law. And he refused to be dishonest with Parliament, resulting in May having to tweak her approach so that he could give a statement to Parliament that was factually correct. But when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, he appointed Suella Braverman as Attorney General specifically because she was more than happy to lie about the legal situation in Parliament. She would say whatever Boris Johnson wanted her to say. Keir Starmer has appointed a non-political Attorney General, so we're safe again, because he will not be destroying his professional reputation for political expediency when he's not a politician. But we can see in this regard the check against executive overreach is only as good as the strength of character advising on the legality of the government's policies. And the Prime Minister appoints these people. So a Trump-like Prime Minister, whether Farage or some other reincarnation of Oswald Mosley, could just pick scoundrels to advise them on legal matters and then do what they like. Yes, someone can bring a case before the courts and the courts can then rule the action illegal. But the courts rule government actions illegal quite regularly. What actually happens, if it's still ongoing, it stops, but that's it. There's no real redress, and that's if there's enough evidence. There isn't always enough evidence. And just as with Trump's behaviour now, that doesn't stop the action in the first place. It simply limits how long it goes on. But the disruption still happens. The illegal action still takes place. And because there are no severe consequences for the politician who issue these illegal orders, there's no deterrent. There's nothing that sort of makes them think, well, we may as well try it out. And if the court stops us, the court stops us. But what we've got to lose? They have nothing to lose. If a head of government does something illegal, the worst case scenario for that government is that a judge tells them to stop it. Like the Supreme Court against Boris Johnson's illegal prorogation of Parliament. He literally shut down Parliament illegally. Parliament didn't want to be shut down. A majority of MPs didn't want to be shut down. They didn't think he had the right to do it, but they couldn't simply ignore him. They had to get judges to give them permission to sit again. The way I look at it, our checks and balances are no better than America's, though there are some things about their system which are better than ours and some things about ours which are better than theirs. But both of them work on what's often called in the UK the good chap theory. The idea that senior politicians are, when push comes to shove, ultimately observe some basic boundaries. Even if we might not always agree with their approach, we nonetheless accept these constitutional boundaries. They have respect for the rule of law. But when the head of government is not a fundamentally decent chap, but a rogue operator like Trump or Johnson, then we find there isn't actually much stopping executive overreach. There are ways to arrest it later on, but that can take a few days or even several weeks to get the case decided, but there's no way to stop it before it happens. I think the only reason why we haven't seen the full Trump effect in Britain so far is because we haven't actually had a Trump-like Prime Minister. Boris Johnson didn't care about conventions, so he blew away many of our checks and balances. But even he had his limits. And as I suggested earlier, his own MPs were free to challenge him when they thought he was risking their own electoral chances. But what would happen if in 10 or 15 years, we haven't changed our systems, Labour are on the way out, but the Tories have been crushed or forced to merge with the Reform UK way of thinking being the dominant philosophy? What if we have a Prime Minister who does what Dominic Cummings wanted to do, which is pretty much what Trump and Musk are doing right now? That is, take a sledgehammer to the operation of government rather than observing any boundaries which only exist within the moral compass which they do not actually possess. As Friedman said in his responses, if you have a rogue leader with no interest in the rule of law, you can take illegal actions that are hard to undo faster than a court can rule them illegal. He suggests that it's not actually possible to protect against this, which may be true, although there are some things you can do to help. For example, one of the ideas with the proposed democratisation of the House of Lords in time is to give them the role of referring the government to the Supreme Court if they think they're acting unconstitutionally. In other words, to make this other chamber a defender of the Constitution. But again, that would just be a legal process which takes longer than the unconstitutional move and in the meantime, nothing to block it. Which leaves us with the only credible option surely being to make sure that if we ever do end up with a rogue in charge of the government again, and one with even fewer scruples and marbles than Boris Johnson, a genuine Britain Trump, that it's at least the fault of the majority of the population. We have to at least make it our fault. If we had elections which returned a share of seats in reasonable proportion to the share of the vote, that would be the best proof against Trumpism wreaking havoc in the UK, because Trumpism is probably not going to get a majority of the votes. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.